The road to Elm Hollow was narrow and cracked, its edges bleeding into the wild grass that lined the countryside. Ethan Granger kept one hand steady on the steering wheel as his weathered truck rattled along the road, the other reaching toward the passenger seat to still a bouncing paper cup of lukewarm coffee. His daughter, Maddie, sat beside him, her nose pressed to the window, eyes wide as they passed fields that stretched into golden silence. "Are we almost there?" she asked, voice muffled against the glass. "Almost," Ethan replied. "See that ridge up ahead? That's where it starts." Elm Hollow wasn't the kind of town that showed up on maps. It was a whisper of a place, quiet, tucked away from the world, the kind of town you came to if you wanted to be forgotten. Or, in Ethan's case, if you needed to begin again. His hands were calloused from years spent fixing things. Engines, floors, fences, broken pieces of his life. A mechanic by trade, a wanderer by circumstance, Ethan had spent the last 5 years drifting from one town to another, never staying long enough to unpack more than a suitcase. But this place, this job, felt different, if only because he was exhausted from running. Maddie turned to him, her brown curls a mess around her face. "Is this where we're gonna live now? Like, for real?" Ethan gave a tired smile. "We'll see, but it's a start." The house they were renting was nothing special, a one-story fixer-upper on the edge of town with creaky floorboards and peeling paint. But it had a roof, running water, and enough space for a little girl and her father to try again. That morning, before the sun had fully risen, Ethan had received a call. A woman named Clara Winslow was looking for someone to help repair a barn on her family's property. The job was temporary, but it was work. That was enough. They arrived at the Winslow property just past noon. A wooden sign, faded but still legible, hung crooked at the entrance. Winslow Acres. Beyond the gate, rolling hills unfolded in layers of green and gold, and standing crooked near the crest of the hill, the barn. It looked like it might collapse with a stiff breeze. Ethan parked the truck and climbed out, stretching his sore back before helping Maddie down. She darted toward the nearest tree, chasing something unseen, while he walked up the gravel path toward the barn. A woman was already there, standing with her arms crossed, staring up at the building like it had just betrayed her. She looked to be in her mid-30s, dressed in a faded denim shirt and worn jeans. Her auburn hair was tied back in a low knot, and her boots were caked with dirt. She had the kind of presence that didn't require words, strong, silent, sure of herself. But something in the set of her shoulders hinted at the weight she carried. "Ethan Granger?" she called out without turning. "That's me," he replied, extending a hand. She turned to face him, her grip firm, expression unreadable. "Clara Winslow, I appreciate you coming." "Glad to," Ethan said. "Barn's seen better days." Clara exhaled, her gaze returning to the structure. "It was my grandfather's. Built it himself. I'd like to keep it standing if possible." Ethan nodded and stepped forward, examining the frame. Time had not been kind to the barn. The red paint was nearly gone, the roof sagged, and several support beams had started to rot. But the structure itself wasn't beyond saving. It had good bones. Like Clara, it was holding on, weathered but still standing. "Roof's the worst of it," he said after a few minutes of inspection. "Some of the beams need replacing. I'll have to reinforce the foundation if we want it to last another winter." "I can help," Clara said. "I'm not much of a carpenter, but I can swing a hammer." Ethan looked at her, a grin tugging at one corner of his mouth. "Most landowners I've worked for don't like to get their hands dirty." "I'm not most landowners," she replied evenly. He believed her. Nearby, Maddie called out, her voice high with excitement. "Dad, come see!" Ethan turned to find her crouched near the porch steps of the farmhouse, her hand extended toward a scruffy old dog that looked like it had survived more winters than it should have. Its fur was matted, one ear flopped sideways, and it eyed Maddie warily before inching forward. Clara chuckled softly. "That's Sadie. She showed up last year and never left. I think she thinks she owns the place." "Can we keep her?" Maddie asked, eyes wide. Ethan hesitated. A dog meant commitment, food, vet bills, one more thing to worry about, but the way Sadie leaned into Maddie's touch and the way Maddie's face lit up, he didn't have the heart to say no. "She's all yours if you want her," Clara said with a small smile. Maddie looked up at her father. He sighed. "Looks like we've got a new roommate." That afternoon, Ethan began work on the barn. Clara stayed nearby, handing him tools, measuring planks, keeping quiet but always watching. There was something about her that reminded him of the barn. Solid, rooted, a little rough around the edges. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it was with purpose. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the field, Clara finally spoke. "I make a decent stew," she said. "If you and Maddie aren't in a rush to leave." Ethan glanced at her surprised. "You sure?" She nodded. "Been a long time since anyone sat at that table." He looked back towards the barn, then to Maddie, who was still chasing Sadie around the porch. "Yeah," he said. "We'd like that." Dinner was simple. Beef stew, fresh cornbread, and sweet iced tea. Maddie ate like she hadn't seen food in days, and even Ethan found himself relaxing as the warmth of the meal settled into his bones. Clara said little, but her presence filled the room. Afterward, as Maddie curled up on the couch with Sadie, Ethan joined Clara on the porch. The stars were beginning to pierce the sky one by one. "This place feels like it has history," he said. Clara nodded. "Too much, maybe." He glanced at her. "You're not alone out here, are you?" She was quiet for a long time, then she said, "I've been alone for a long time, even when I wasn't." Ethan understood that too well. Loneliness didn't require distance. It lived in the silence between people who had stopped trying. They sat there for a while, neither speaking, neither needing to. And in that quiet, something began to settle. Not certainty, not yet, but something small and hopeful, like a seed waiting for the rain. The early morning air over Winslow Acres was crisp, laced with the scent of dew-kissed grass and freshly turned earth. Ethan Granger stood alone in the barn, hammer in hand, pausing to watch a beam of sunlight cut through the newly patched roof. He ran his hand along one of the reinforced support posts, the wood solid beneath his palm. It was progress. Tangible, honest progress, the kind you could feel in your bones. Behind him, the creak of old hinges gave way to soft footsteps. "You're here early," Clara's voice called gently. Ethan turned to see her in the doorway, steaming mugs in hand. She offered him one. "Thought you might like something hot." He took it with a quiet nod. "Thanks." The coffee was strong, black, exactly how he liked it. Clara leaned against the wall beside him, eyes scanning the barn's interior. "You've done good work already. I barely recognize the place." "It's getting there," Ethan said, glancing up at the patched roof. "A little more bracing, and the structure will hold through the winter." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping coffee while the early sunlight filtered in like golden threads. Then Clara spoke, quieter this time. "This place meant everything to my grandfather. He built it himself, every beam, every nail. I was just a kid when he passed, but I remember watching him work. He moved like it was the most important thing in the world. It probably was, Ethan said. Sometimes places are more than just places. Clara gave a soft laugh tinged with sadness. He used to say the land remembers, that every footprint, every harvest, every storm leaves a mark. Ethan nodded. Sounds like a man who understood roots. Clara looked at him, her gaze searching. What about you? You've got roots anywhere? Ethan took a long breath. Had some, once. He wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe it was the way Clara asked. Not prying, just present. The way people asked when they actually cared about the answer. My wife, Emily, he continued, we had a place back in Vermont. Small garage, house behind it, nothing fancy. We were building something, then... He stopped himself. Clara didn't push. She waited. There was an accident. A driver ran a red light. She didn't make it. Clara's features softened, her coffee held tightly between both hands. I'm sorry. Ethan nodded. Maddie was just 3. She doesn't remember much. Maybe that's a blessing. He didn't usually talk about Emily. Not the real parts, not the hollowed-out days afterward, not the guilt that clung to him like oil. But something about Clara, the way she held space for silence, made him keep going. I tried to keep everything running, he said, but the business dried up. I sold the house, started drifting. Clara looked down. You were trying to outrun the grief. Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. Something like that. She was quiet again, then said, My parents passed a few years ago. First Mom, then Dad. It was quick, unexpected. After that, it was just me. Must have been hard, Ethan said. Clara nodded. Still is. Everyone assumed I'd sell the land. Developers have been circling since the funeral. Thought I'd cash out and leave, but I couldn't. Why not? Clara's fingers tightened on the coffee mug. Because this place is the last thing I have of them, of who I was before. I didn't know how to move on, so I stayed. I kept it alive. Barely. Ethan looked around the barn. Looks like you've done more than that. She gave a small smile. Some days I think I'm crazy for holding on. He didn't reply right away. Then simply, You're not. Just then, Maddie's voice called out from the farmhouse yard. Dad, come see what Sadie did. Ethan turned to look through the barn window. His daughter was standing with her hands on her hips, a wide grin on her face, Sadie at her side with something long and dirty hanging from her mouth. I should probably go rescue the poor thing she's chasing, Ethan said with a smile. Clara chuckled. Go ahead. I'll start measuring the next beam. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to lower behind the trees, Ethan was fixing a crooked window frame on the side of the house when he heard a vehicle approaching. It wasn't the rumble of an old farm truck or the squeak of a tractor. It was too smooth, too polished. Ethan turned as a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the farmhouse. Its surface gleamed like oil. A man stepped out, a tailored charcoal gray suit, expensive shoes completely unsuited for gravel. He wore sunglasses despite the fading light, and his hair was slicked back with precision. Ethan felt something shift in the air. Clara appeared a moment later, her shoulders straight, eyes narrowed. Mr. Sterling, she said, each syllable clipped. Clara, the man replied, removing his sunglasses with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I heard you've got company. Clara glanced at Ethan, then back. This is Ethan Granger. He's working on the barn. Sterling turned to Ethan with a practiced smile. Ah, the handyman. Ethan didn't bother replying. Sterling returned his attention to Clara. I'll make this brief. You know why I'm here. You're wasting your time, she said. My answer hasn't changed. Sterling's smile faltered. Clara, you've been sitting on land worth millions. And for what? Sentimentality? This land has been in my family for 3 generations, and it won't survive another year like this. Be reasonable, let it go. Ethan stepped forward. I think she said no. Sterling gave him a glance, more amused than threatened. You don't want to get involved in this, friend. Ethan's jaw tightened. Too late. Sterling sighed. You used to be a smart woman, Clara. Don't throw away a future on a broken past. Then he turned, climbed back into his car, and drove off, leaving dust and tension in his wake. Clara didn't speak for a long time. Ethan watched her, watched the way her jaw clenched, her hands curled at her sides. Who is he? Ethan finally asked. Mitchell Sterling, she said, my father's former business partner. He backed our expansion plans years ago. When Dad died, the investments fell apart. Sterling lost money. Now he thinks that means he owns the place. Does he? No, not legally, but he's got influence, money, people who listen to him. Ethan nodded. He's not going to stop, is he? No, Clara said softly. He isn't. They stood together on the porch, the last rays of sun painting the fields in amber light. Sadie padded up to sit between them, Maddie trailing behind, her hair wild and eyes bright. We'll figure something out, Ethan said. He doesn't get to take this from you. Clara turned to him. Why do you care? Ethan met her gaze. Because I've already lost one home I couldn't save. I'm not losing another. Clara didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. And in the silence that followed, something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep and sure, like the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. The heat was heavy that morning, the kind that settled into the bones and whispered of a storm yet to come. Clouds hung low on the horizon, distant but brewing, the air tight with expectation. Ethan Granger had seen enough weather in his life to read the signs, and today the wind carried warnings. He was in the garden behind the farmhouse, helping Maddie and Clara plant early autumn squash. The soil was dry but rich, dark from years of care, and, despite the threat of rain, Maddie dug into it with reckless joy. Like this? She asked, cupping a small seedling in her hands. Clara knelt beside her, brushing a streak of dirt from her cheek. Perfect. Just enough space between them so they don't crowd each other. Maddie beamed. I'm going to be a professional farmer, maybe even grow chocolate. Ethan chuckled from where he was pulling weeds. Let me know when that harvest comes in. Sadie lounged nearby in a patch of shade, her ears flicking lazily at the sound of their laughter. The scene felt almost normal, almost like a life that belonged to them, but the tension lingered underneath, coiled and waiting. They hadn't heard from Sterling in nearly a week, and that silence made Ethan nervous. Men like him didn't vanish. They recalculated, and he had a feeling something was coming. Still, there was comfort in the moment, and Ethan was learning to let those linger. By mid-afternoon, the wind had changed. Leaves rustled louder with a sense of urgency, and the light shifted to a strange golden hue that preceded storms. Clara stood on the porch, wiping her hands on a rag as she watched the sky. That doesn't look friendly, she murmured. Ethan joined her, scanning the clouds. We've got maybe an hour before it hits. She turned toward the barn. We should get the animals secured. Last time we lost half a section of fencing. I'll check the east side, Ethan said. It was looking weak last time I was out there. As Clara and Maddie led the goats and chickens into shelter, Ethan moved quickly toward the back pasture. The fence line stretched across the slope like a jagged scar, and, sure enough, the northern section bowed under age and neglect. He crouched beside one of the posts, testing the tension on the wire. Too loose. A strong gust would rip it apart. He was still working when Clara appeared behind him, sleeves rolled up and determination in her stride. "I told you I've got this," Ethan said, glancing back. "And I told you I don't watch from the porch," she replied. They worked side by side, driving temporary stakes into the soil and reinforcing the worst parts of the fence. Thunder grumbled somewhere behind them, closer now. The light dimmed further, as if the sky were holding its breath. Then the wind hit. It came in sudden, violent bursts, gusts strong enough to rattle the fencing and send dust spiraling through the air. The first drops of rain were fat, cold, and hard. "Go!" Ethan shouted. "Get back to the house." But Clara didn't move. She was still trying to secure one last post. "Clara!" he yelled again. "Let it go! If this fence breaks, the cattle—" Another gust slammed into them and the wooden stake cracked. Clara stumbled and Ethan lunged, grabbing her arm and pulling her back just as the post gave way completely. They fell hard into the wet grass, gasping, the rain now falling in sheets. Clara struggled to sit up, soaked through, mud streaked across her shirt. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not worth it," he said, breathless. "You can't save everything." Clara looked at him, defiant even as the wind whipped her hair into her eyes. "If I don't try, who will?" Ethan met her gaze, steady and certain. "You don't have to do it alone." Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by a roar of thunder that shook the ground. They scrambled to their feet, Ethan gripping Clara's hand as they sprinted back toward the barn. Inside, the storm's fury was muffled but ever present. Rain drummed against the roof, wind howled through the gaps in the walls. Ethan slammed the door shut behind them, breathing hard. Clara leaned against a beam, soaked, shaken, but not from cold, from something deeper. She looked at Ethan. "I can't lose this place." "You won't," he said. "You don't know that," she whispered. "Sterling, he's not just a man. He's a machine. Money, power, he's going to find a way." "Then we make it impossible," Ethan said. "You said the land matters to this town, right?" Clara blinked at him. "Yeah, my family's been part of this place for generations." "Then let's remind them," Ethan said. "Let's give them a reason to care. You have land, space, history. We open it to the people. Give them something they can stand behind." "You're talking about a market?" Clara asked. "A market, an event, anything that makes this farm essential to the town. If they see what's at stake, they'll fight with you. Sterling can't buy a community's heart." Clara looked at him for a long time. The storm raged outside, but something calmer moved between them. "I don't know if I can pull it off," she admitted. "You don't have to," Ethan said. "We will." In the following days, the barn repairs paused and the focus shifted. Clara reached out to old friends. Ethan visited the town's general store and diner. Maddie delivered handwritten flyers with crayon borders and crooked hearts. The response surprised them. Locals began stopping by, some offering to help, others donating goods. An old man brought crates of apples. A teacher from the elementary school offered to paint signs. A retired carpenter dropped off reclaimed wood for the barn. Hopewell was waking up, and for Clara, the shock wasn't just in the help, it was in the realization that she had never truly been alone. She had pushed people away for so long, convinced that no one would care. But now, standing in her kitchen as neighbors filled her fields with laughter and tents and folding tables, she saw it. They did care. She stood at the window, arms folded, watching the bustle. Ethan stepped beside her, brushing sawdust from his jeans. "They showed up," she said softly. "Told you," he replied. She turned to him, something unreadable in her eyes. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "You gave me a chance when I needed it. Maybe this is just me returning the favor." "But it's more than that, isn't it?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "Yeah, it is." Clara looked down. "You said you lost your wife." "I did." "And now?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Now," he looked at her. "For the first time in a long time, I don't feel like running." Outside, Maddie laughed, chasing Sadie through the muddy grass. The storm had passed, but something deeper had begun to stir, something neither of them was quite ready to name. Not yet, but soon. By the time the sun rose over Winslow Acres that Saturday morning, the farm was already alive with motion. The fields buzzed with energy, tables unfolding, tents going up, the clatter of crates and cheerful voices ringing out as neighbors arrived one by one. What had started as a desperate idea in the middle of a storm had bloomed into something real: the Hopewell Harvest Market. Ethan stood near the barn with Maddie perched on a hay bale, a handmade name tag pinned to her shirt that read in crooked letters, "Official Farm Assistant." Sadie dozed at her feet, her tail twitching every few seconds in response to the excitement in the air. "You think people will really come?" Maddie asked, squinting at the gate. Ethan smiled, wiping dust off his hands. "They're already here, kiddo." And she was right to ask, because for so long the idea that anyone would show up, to support, to care, to fight, had seemed impossible to Clara. But they had. They were. By noon, the market was in full swing. Local vendors filled the field, honey jars glinting in the sun, rows of fresh produce stacked in baskets, hand-sewn quilts waving gently in the breeze. Children laughed as they chased each other through the grass. A bluegrass trio played under a maple tree, their music weaving through the scent of cinnamon pastries and fresh cider. Clara walked through it all like someone in a dream. She greeted old neighbors she hadn't seen in years, accepted hugs from school teachers who once knew her parents, and even caught the eye of Henry Dobbs, the grumpy hardware store owner, nodding in silent approval. The farm wasn't just alive, it was loved. Ethan joined her near the barn, 2 mugs of cider in hand. "This what you pictured?" Clara took the cup, her hand brushing his. "No," she said honestly. "It's more." They stood together, watching Maddie enthusiastically explain to another child how squash plants worked, using gestures far bigger than necessary. Sadie followed behind, sniffing baskets and tolerating the endless stream of children who insisted on petting her. "This is the kind of thing Sterling can't buy," Ethan said quietly, "no matter how many suits he wears or banks he calls." Clara nodded, but there was tension in her jaw. "He's not done. He won't stop just because people showed up." As if summoned by her words, a black luxury car rolled up the gravel path. It didn't stop at the entrance. It came straight in, past the signs, the vendors, the town's heart in full bloom. Mitchell Sterling stepped out, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dirt. He adjusted his cufflinks like he had something to prove. All noise seemed to still as he approached, not because of fear, but because everyone could feel he didn't belong here. Clara squared her shoulders. Ethan moved subtly closer, not blocking her, but near enough to remind her she wasn't alone. "Well," Sterling said, scanning the crowd with thinly veiled contempt, "a little carnival in the weeds. Cute." "You're not welcome here," Clara said calmly. "I own a vested interest in this property," he snapped. "You don't own anything here," she said, louder now, enough for others to hear. Not the land, not the people, not their loyalty. You tried to take something that didn't belong to you, and you lost. Sterling's smile faltered. The county will disagree. Ethan stepped in then, his voice quiet but iron solid. You said that last week, but I happen to know the county board received over 200 letters of opposition in the last 4 days, including a petition signed by most of Hopewell. Sterling turned red. You can't seriously think— I don't have to think, Clara interrupted. I know. You lost. You can still leave with your name, but keep pushing, and this town will bury you in headlines. There was a moment of silence. Then Sterling stepped back. Not much, just an inch. But it was enough. He didn't say another word. He turned, got into his car, and drove off. Fast enough to leave a dust trail, but not fast enough to drown out the small wave of applause that rippled through the crowd. Clara stood frozen. Ethan touched her elbow. It's over. And for the first time, she believed him. Later that evening, after the last vendor had packed up, after the children had gone home sticky-fingered and laughing, Clara sat on the porch with Ethan and Maddie. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, and the air was warm with the smell of trampled grass and baked apples. Maddie curled up with Sadie at her feet, her head nodding sleepily. She had the best day of her life, Ethan said softly. I can tell, Clara replied. It was one of mine, too. He turned to her. You did it. We did, she corrected. He hesitated, then said, I meant it. I don't want to leave. Clara looked at him, her heart thudding. Then don't. Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his. You sure? Clara leaned into his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been sure since the night of the storm. They sat in silence, the kind that wrapped around them like a quilt. There were no promises spoken, no grand declarations, just presence. Just a beginning. In the days that followed, the market became a permanent fixture, monthly at first, then weekly. Visitors came from neighboring towns. The Winslow farm, once forgotten, became a symbol of community, of perseverance. Maddie insisted on planting her own garden, and when her chocolate beans never grew, she proudly renamed the carrots Cocoa Sticks. Sadie became the unofficial greeter, always waiting at the gate. And Ethan never left. He fixed the broken, not just with wood and tools, but with steadiness, with laughter, with love. Clara, once sure that she would carry everything alone, found a partner, a home, and a future in the last place she thought she'd find it. One morning, as they walked through the field, hand in hand, Maddie raced up to them, pulling Clara's hand excitedly. The flowers, she cried, come see. They followed her to the far side of the garden, where weeks ago they'd planted a wild patch, not sure if it would take root. Now, purple blooms had broken through the soil. They're growing, Maddie shouted. Clara smiled through tears. Yes, sweetheart, they really are. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned in, letting herself feel the peace that had always seemed just out of reach. Because sometimes the roots you plant in desperation bloom into something far more beautiful than you ever imagined. And sometimes what grows in hope is home. Thanks for being here with us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It means more than you know. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to hear your story too. See you in the next one.